it's time to replenish your graveyard into play. We are going to do a deck tech on the deck Replenish in Premodern. So, what is Replenish? It's a sorcery that brings back all of the enchantments in your graveyard into play, and that's broken. So the entire deck revolves around doing just that, which is why you'll see cards like Frantic Search, very, very mana efficient at essentially 0 mana, to put 2 enchantments into your graveyard and dig for the card Replenish. Likewise, you have cards like Intuition, which allow you to search for 3 copies of Replenish when you know that you need to resolve it on your next turn. Or it can search for enchantments that you want to go into the graveyard, and no matter what, whichever one they give you, it doesn't matter because you've got the Replenish in hand. So there's many strategies you can use Intuition for, but it really is, in this deck, brute force. Then you've got these other cards that just stick the deck together. Swords to Plowshares to ensure that you control the board and you don't die suddenly. And then you've got the little piece of glue, Sarbo's Web at the moment, because a recent banning meant that we no longer had access to Parallax Tide. So actually, decks are trying to find their feet. At the moment, some of the decks you'll notice are playing essentially air in the deck. And Sarbo's Web just allows you to go faster through your deck because it cantrips, and occasionally it has an impact on the game which allows you to survive longer, switching off your opponent's mainlands so that they can't attack you, or switching off your opponent's Rishadan ports and so on so that you're able to combo off the following turn. So it's a very, very useful little piece of glue for the deck. We shall see how things pan out in the future, whether that's still the little piece of glue to hold the deck together in that slot. Now, in terms of the enchantments, you'll see staples like Attunement, again, another way to efficiently sort through your deck to find the replenishers and systematically put into the bin the enchantments. Then you have these other enchantments that are the staples of the deck, Parallax Wave and Seal of Cleansing. The combination of these 2 cards will allow you to exile all your opponent's creatures, and then if you play a Parallax Wave fairly, it'll allow you to exile creatures systematically to get you deeper into the game. Then it goes away, your opponent's creatures come back, and then you combo off and it's not relevant. So it's really kind of like fogging for a while. The Seal of Cleansing by itself also serves the role of ensuring your opponent can't do anything with their nasty enchantments and artifacts. The last card to mention is Opalescence, which is the way to win the game. We have fundamentally talked about the crazy combination, which is getting enchantments into play. But what does that actually do? Well, Opalescence will allow you to attack for 20 plus damage in 1 attack step. So it's a really, really useful way to close the game out. Note that there are scenarios where your Opalescence will not be a creature itself, or you need a second Opalescence to make both of them creatures, and you have to be aware of scenarios where you have to pass the turn, have creatures in play, and your opponent Wrath of Gods, so you're going to need to use a Seal of Cleansing to destroy your own Opalescence so that they don't destroy all of your enchantments, i.e. creatures. So weird shenanigans that might occur when you have 1 or 2 Opalescences out, so be aware of that. All right, the last thing to point attention to in terms of the spells is Decree of Silence. This is a new addition. I did mention the banning of Parallax Tide. Bannings in Premodern happen very infrequently, once every 2 to 3 years, so very infrequent. But recently, with that banning, the deck is still trying to find its feet. It used to be the tier 1 deck. Now, we don't know exactly where it sits, but it's still darned strong. And Decree of Silence is the current tech of choice that's filling the deck alongside Sarbo's Web. So Decree of Silence allows you to, when you cast your Replenish, come into play and ensure that they can't really answer anything, because they're going to need 4 naturalizers to naturalize 3 times, have them counted, and then finally naturalize the thing they need to do, which is maybe the Opalescence, for example. So in general, Decree of Silence says when you cast Replenish, if this is in your graveyard, you're going to win the game. So it's a really, really good I win button. So you're commonly going to be pitching these uncastable cards so that they can be returned with Replenish. However, it also has this ability to cycle, and this is something that a lot of control decks actually can't deal with. So you can play a very long game against control, wait for the right time, and then use Decree of Silence to counter your opponent's counter spell, and they can't counter it back. They're going to need to aim that counter on the spell of the original spell itself, which means that whatever you're doing, generally your Decree of Silence will stop a thing that you're concerned about. It may not necessarily protect your combo. It's a lot of mana to do that, but it will definitely stop your opponent comboing. So it's a very useful one for combo mirrors. Your mana base is eclectic. You have Sky Cloud Expanses in order to ensure that you can cast things with the appropriate colors of mana. And then you have Ancient Tomb, which allows you to vault ahead in mana with some colorless, letting you play a Replenish really, really early, like as early as turn 3. Is it strategic to do that? It really depends on the matchup and how quickly you've been able to frantic search things into the graveyard, but it is still really, really good. It's also good at getting an attunement out on turn 2. So in the sideboard, you'll see a few flex slots here. Some people play defense grids as a way to shut down your opponent's counter spells and ensure that you can combo off really early in the game. Other decks you might find play their own counter spells. They might play mana leaks because mana leaks are easier on their mana base, and it allows them to combo off quite early because the 3 extra mana is something that they can't, that usually opposing decks can pay for when it's later in the game. You've also got the creature plan, which is Meddling Mage, which allows you to shut off your opponent's counterspells or something that they're going to use to interact, like Graveyard Hate, or Exalted Angel. And the combination of these two give you a plan B when your opponent brings in all the Graveyard Hate and all the enchantment destruction and their counterspells like Annul that deal with enchantments. And instead, you play Meddling Mage and Exalted Angel, and they've taken out the Swords to Plowshares. It's a really, really good combination as a plan B. So there are other flex slots in there that you can look at in your own time. If you want to, you can experiment with different ones here depending on what's in your metagame. The main thing here is normally at the end of a deck tech, we try to give you a budget option, and that's not the case here. You will notice that the staples of the deck, like Replenish on the reserved list, $250 plus for 1 copy, and you're going to need 4 copies. Intuition also on the reserved list, and it's exorbitantly expensive. And then you've even got cards like Ancient Tomb, which are not reserved list, but they're incredibly expensive. So we just have to hold out fingers crossed for a reprint of something along these lines. Even cards like Decree of Silence, which have historically been absolute bargain basement budget cards because they're unplayable, in this deck are actually kind of good and suddenly have become $45. So there really isn't a budget version of this deck, I'm afraid. You could try and sleeve it up with different printings, but the amount of money you're knocking off the price tag is not going to be significant. So generally, people who are playing Replenish are playing it because they already own Replenish as a card, or for those of you who are watching the deck tech to understand Replenish, I would say that if someone is playing Replenish in your metagame, pay close attention to the cards that matter. In general, the card that matters is the namesake of the deck, Replenish. So if you can hold multiple counter spells for the turn they play Replenish, if they are not playing an Abeyance or Orum's Chant version of the deck, and they can't just shut down your counter spells that turn, you're generally going to be able to just reserve enough counter spells for the number of Replenishes they have in the deck, and you're fine. Because their actual plan of casting the enchantments is just there to slow the game down, like Parallax Wave stopping you from attacking. The other relevant card is Opalescence. So your opponent can play a game where you counter their Replenishes, but secretly all they want to do is actually resolve the Opalescence, which switches on all the enchantments you were ignoring because they weren't really actually stopping you from stopping them from losing. So they play the Opalescence, and then they actually attack 2 times with the new creatures that they have on the battlefield. So essentially, just pinpoint your interaction for Replenish or Opalescence, depending on the game plan you have. And sometimes you might have to aim it at both, but again, you may run out of counter spells, especially if they're leveraging their own mana leaks in the sideboard. If you're in a deck without counter spells, then I'm sorry. But if you're in a deck without counterspells, you have the opportunity to interact with them, one, on the board through your naturalizers. So ensure that you reserve the naturalizers for the opalescences. And then even if they cast the Replenish, if you're able to remove their opalescence and they run out of replenishes or run out of opalescences, so you have enough naturalizers for opalescences, they actually cannot win the game. So you might find it very hard for you to win the game, but they can't win the game. And remember, they go through their deck with frantic searches and attunements. So technically they can deck with this. The other alternative is to fight on the graveyard axis. So you just always prevent these things from coming into play in the first place via Replenish. Just be aware that they have that other game plan to be able to play the opalescence plan and straight to the board and circumnavigate the graveyard. Or they may know that you don't have counterspells and you have graveyard interaction, so they actually bring in the Exalted Angel Meddling Mage plan. And in that instance, you may need to think about, do I take out my Swords to Plowshares or my removal spells in game 2 and I see what they do? And now that I know they have the creature plan, I bring those Swords to Plowshares in and I hope they don't game the system. A good player in a hard copy game where you're shuffling cards will shuffle their entire sideboard into their deck each game and then remove the cards, so you don't actually know whether they're still on the same game plan. So my pro tip is to watch for that. See if they do that. If they don't do that, then generally you know they're on the same game plan as the previous one, and then you can swiftly pop those other sideboard cards in, such as your Swords to Plowshares, and know that you've got your ability to interact with them. Okay. Well, that's really our deck tech. So if you've enjoyed learning more about Replenish, realizing you've got these cards hidden away in a binder and you want to play the deck, then it's a really good deck to sleeve up in Premodern. If you see someone do that at your local metagame, then think smarter, not harder, work smarter, not harder, and think about which spells you're going to counter and which axis you're going to play on. Don't try to interact with everything. So if you've liked our deck tech, then please subscribe, like the video, it really helps us out. We're Adelaide Eternal, and we'll see you in the next one.